Listen up, because what I'm about to tell you is going to completely change how you remember Saturday morning cartoons. You think you know Alvin and the Chipmunks? The 1980s cartoon that dominated your childhood? Well, I spent 3 weeks digging through the production history of this show, and what I found is absolutely insane. We're talking corporate conspiracies, exploitation films, and audio manipulation that would make modern producers jealous. So in this video, I'm going to reveal 15 bizarre facts about the 1980s Alvin and the Chipmunks that will blow your mind. And I'm not talking about surface level trivia here. I'm talking about the weird technical secrets, the dark Hollywood connections, and the corporate drama that nobody talks about. 99% of people who grew up watching this show have no idea about any of this stuff. But by the end of this video, you're going to understand why this wasn't just some innocent kids show. It was actually one of the most technically innovative and bizarrely controlled franchises in television history. And before we dive in, the voice recording technique they used, it's basically the grandfather of modern hyperpop music.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to do a song with our friends,
But I'm getting ahead of myself. Alright, so let's start with the most mind-blowing technical secret that made the whole thing possible. Because without this, there would be no Chipmunks at all. Number 1, the voice technique. Here's something that's going to mess with your head. You know those high-pitched chipmunk voices that defined your childhood? They weren't created the way you think. Most people assume they just sped up normal recordings or used some kind of digital pitch shifter, right? Wrong. Here's what actually happened. Ross Bagdasarian Jr. and his wife Janice Carmen would go into the recording studio and perform all the dialogue at an extremely slow, deep pace. Like, imagine talking in slow motion while trying to maintain the exact emotional timing of a normal conversation. Then, they'd play back the recording at normal speed. The playback acceleration would automatically shift the pitch way up, creating that signature chipmunk sound. But here's why this is so much harder than it sounds. You have to act slowly. You have to deliver emotional performances, nail comedic timing, and maintain character consistency, all while speaking at half speed or slower. It's like trying to do improv comedy underwater. And this wasn't some digital process. This was pure analog tape manipulation. No auto-tune, no fancy software. Just raw skill and magnetic tape. This technique was pioneered by Ross Bagdasarian Sr. back in 1958, and they were still using it in the 1980s. Number 2, the syndication scandal. Now let me tell you about how your childhood memories might actually be a lie. In 1988, Bagdasarian Productions made a massive syndication deal with Ruby Spears and Warner Brothers to get the show into weekday reruns. Sounds great, right? But here's the problem. They sped up the episodes. Yeah, you heard me right. They artificially increased the playback speed of the syndicated episodes to squeeze in more commercial time. This was a common practice back then. Stations would speed up shows to cram in extra ads. But think about what that means for a show where the entire identity is based on precise speed and pitch manipulation. The syndicated versions were running faster than the original NBC broadcasts, which meant the voices were even higher pitched than intended. So if you watched the Chipmunks primarily through syndicated reruns in the late 80s and early 90s, which most of us did, you were watching a distorted, commercially compromised version of the show. Your nostalgia is based on a version that the creators never intended you to see. Number 3, the two-person voice monopoly. Alright, here's something that sounds impossible, but is absolutely true. Every single main character voice in the 1980s Chipmunks was performed by just 2 people. Ross Bagdasarian Jr. voiced Alvin, Simon, and Dave Seville, the human dad. That's 3 completely different characters, all from one guy. Meanwhile, his wife Janice Carmen voiced Theodore, and all 3 Chipettes, Brittany, Jeanette, and Eleanor. Later on, she even voiced Miss Miller. Think about that for a second. A husband and wife team controlled the vocal identity of 7 core characters in a major network cartoon. That's basically unheard of in the animation industry. Most shows spread the work around to multiple voice actors for practical reasons. But Bagdasarian Productions kept everything in-house because they owned the IP and wanted absolute control over how these characters sounded. This created this weird situation where the entire emotional landscape of the show was filtered through the creative decisions of exactly 2 people. It was a complete creative monopoly. Number 4. The corporate naming conspiracy. Now let me tell you about something that's going to make you see the Chipmunks in a completely different light. Their names aren't random. They're corporate tributes. Alvin, Simon, and Theodore were explicitly named after 3 executives at Liberty Records. Alvin Bennett, the president, Simon Waronker, the founder, and Theodore Keep, the recording engineer. Ross Bagdasarian Sr. literally named his cartoon characters after the guys who funded his novelty record. It's like if Mickey Mouse was named after Walt Disney's accountant. So every time you watched the show as a kid, you were unknowingly celebrating the corporate structure of a 1950s record label. But here's where it gets even weirder. The Chipettes, Brittany, Jeanette, and Eleanor, have no officially confirmed origin for their names. The creators deliberately kept it ambiguous. And I think that's intentional. By refusing to tie the Chipettes' names to specific record label executives, the new generation of creators was establishing creative independence. They were saying, we're not beholden to the corporate legacy that defined the boys. Number 5. Janice Carmen's dark past. Okay, this next one is going to blow your mind because it's such a wild contrast. Janice Carmen, the woman who voiced Theodore and all 3 Chipettes, the co-creator of this wholesome family show, has a very different past. Before she became the voice of innocent cartoon chipmunks, she appeared in 2 1970s exploitation films, Switchblade Sisters in 1975 and Slumber Party 57 in 1976. Now, if you're not familiar with exploitation films, these are low-budget, independent movies that often feature violence, mature themes, and suggestive content. They're the complete opposite of G-rated Saturday morning cartoons. So the same woman who would go on to create one of the most family-friendly franchises in American entertainment started her career in gritty B movies. That's like finding out Mr. Rogers used to be in a biker gang. This career transition is absolutely wild. She went from the fringes of adult cinema to having strict control over one of the most wholesome IPs in children's entertainment. Number 6. The animation studio chaos. Here's something that explains a lot about the show's inconsistent quality. The Chipmunks cycled through 3 different animation studios during its run. Ruby Spears Enterprises handled seasons 1 through 5 from 1983 to 1987. Then, Murakami Wolf Swenson took over briefly in 1988 for 11 episodes. Finally, DIC Enterprises finished out the later seasons from 1988 to 1990. This kind of production volatility is usually a sign of commercial or budgetary problems. Animation studios don't just change hands for fun. It means contracts fell through or money got tight. And while Bagdasarian Productions maintained creative control over the writing and voice acting, the visual presentation was constantly in flux. Different studios have different animation styles and quality standards. So if you ever noticed that the show looked different from season to season, now you know why. The show was being passed around like a hot potato. Number 7. The Cookie Chomper tragedy. Alright, now we're getting into the really dark stuff. Let me tell you about the most infamous episode, Cookie Chomper 3. This episode is about Theodore adopting a stray kitten named Cookie Chomper 3. Cute, right? Classic kids show setup. Except the episode ends with the kitten getting hit by a car and dying. Permanently. No resurrection, and it wasn't all a dream. The cat is dead, and Theodore has to deal with genuine grief and mourning. In an era where most children's programs avoided permanent consequences, this episode was a deliberate, profound risk. The creative team decided to confront mortality head-on in a Saturday morning cartoon. The episode dives deep into the Chipmunks' experience of grief. It's heavy, emotional, and refuses to offer a quick resolution. I mean, think about it. You're a kid in the 1980s. You turn on your favorite cartoon expecting fun musical numbers, and instead, you get a meditation on death and loss. That's intense. Number 8. The Alien Encounter. Here's another example of how weird this show could get. There's an episode where Alvin is grounded for throwing a party while Dave is away. So Alvin's stuck at home, ordered to clean the house, dealing with intense loneliness. Normal stuff. But then, and I'm not making this up, he encounters an alien. Yeah, an actual extraterrestrial, in a domestic punishment storyline. The show just casually throws in a science fiction element to resolve a grounding situation. The alien encounter is presented as a manifestation of Alvin's internal emotional state. The alien is basically a metaphor for his isolation and desire for connection. This is such a bizarre narrative choice. Most shows would stick to realistic consequences. But the Chipmunks just said, you know what? Let's add an alien. Number 9. The identity swap hostage crisis. Okay, this next episode premise is absolutely wild and kind of dark. Alvin runs away to the woods and encounters a truly wild chipmunk, an actual non-talking chipmunk. And Alvin proposes they swap lives. So the wild chipmunk goes to live with Dave and pretends to be Alvin, while the real Alvin tries to live in the wild. But here's where it gets dark. Alvin gets captured by a hunter who wants to profit off him. The real Alvin is now being held hostage, and Dave can't tell the difference between his adopted son and a random wild animal. Simon, Theodore, and the feral chipmunk have to mount a dangerous rescue operation to save Alvin from being sold or killed. This episode explicitly explores the constant physical danger inherent in their hybrid existence. They may live like humans, but they're genetically still vulnerable animals. Outside of Dave's protection, they can be captured and commodified. Number 10. The con artist uncle. Early in the series, there's an episode called Uncle Harry that introduces a charlatan chipmunk who claims to be the boy's long-lost uncle. Uncle Harry manipulates the chipmunks into earning money for him, which he's actually using to pay off a debt to a powerful strongman, implying underworld connections. So this kids' show just casually introduced themes of identity fraud, financial exploitation, and organized crime directly into the Seville household. For a show aimed at children, featuring a con artist relative who uses child labor to settle debts with what's essentially a mob enforcer, is surprisingly mature content. This episode taught kids that not everyone who claims to be family has your best interests at heart. Number 11. Frank Welker's secret role. Despite the tight family control over the core voices, the franchise occasionally employed external voice talent for specialized roles. And one of those talents was Frank Welker, one of the most legendary voice actors in animation history, with thousands of credits. But Welker's contribution was very specific. He provided special vocal effects. He wasn't voicing main characters. He was responsible for animalistic sounds and creature effects. For example, in later direct-to-video films, he provided the vocal effects for Theodore in Mr. Talbot's werewolf forms. This reveals the strict boundary Bagdasarian Productions placed on external collaborators. Creature effects could be outsourced to an industry specialist, but the primary speaking and singing voices remained locked down by the family. Number 12. The final rebrand. By 1990, at the start of its 8th and final season, the series underwent a radical overhaul. They completely rebranded the show as the Chipmunks Go to the Movies. This wasn't just a title change. They abandoned the standard animated sitcom structure entirely. Every segment was now dedicated to parodying famous motion pictures with a completely new theme song. This extreme shift suggests that the conventional episodic format had reached narrative saturation after 7 seasons. The adoption of the movie parody structure was a strategic attempt to refresh the series and capitalize on Hollywood blockbusters. But it also shows how desperate they were to keep the show alive. When your core format stops working, you pivot to whatever's popular. Number 13. The controversial movie. The theatrically released film, The Chipmunk Adventure from 1987, is widely regarded as a pinnacle of the 1980s Chipmunks experience. But here's the problem. It's notoriously difficult to find on streaming services, and physical copies often command high prices. Why? Because the film is effectively being archived by the creators themselves. There are elements within the film deemed problematic by modern standards. Specific claims point to mild 80s casual racism, and particularly suggestive content, including a Chipettes song titled Getting Lucky. So the people who own the IP are actively choosing to limit access to a beloved, commercially successful piece of media because its content risks damaging the overall brand equity. This is active IP curation. They're prioritizing safe, modern franchise iterations while allowing the culturally complicated older material to fade into obscurity. Number 14. The avant-garde legacy. Let's circle back to something I mentioned earlier, because it's genuinely fascinating from a music history perspective. The original 1958 novelty records were among the first musical projects deliberately built around extreme distortion of vocal tracks. This extreme processing resulted in an audio signature that was often described as abrasive or jarring, which is why it got classified as novelty or children's fare. But when you analyze it conceptually, the Chipmunks stand as an early predecessor to modern experimental genres. Today, genres like hyperpop are defined by abrasive textures, extreme digital distortion, and sped-up vocals. The franchise carries this strange duality. It's simultaneously one of the most successful children's franchises of all time, and a conceptual ancestor to avant-garde music focused on deliberate manipulation of the human voice. Number 15, the Family Empire. Here's the final piece that ties everything together. Bagdasarian Productions is a family-run entity, and that explains literally everything we've talked about. The singular control over voices, the strict IP management, the willingness to archive problematic content, the consistent creative vision. It all comes down to this, being a family business. Ross Bagdasarian Jr. and Janice Carmen didn't just work on the Chipmunks. They are the Chipmunks. They own it, they control it, they protect it. This level of centralized control is extremely rare in major network animation. Most shows are collaborative efforts with dozens of stakeholders and corporate oversight. But the Chipmunks operated under a tight duopoly structure. Two people controlled the entire emotional spectrum of the franchise during the 1980s. This ensured absolute consistency and fidelity to their vision while building a multi-generational franchise. So there you have it, 15 weird facts about the 1980s Alvin and the Chipmunks that completely change how you see the show. This wasn't just some simple Saturday morning cartoon. It was a technologically innovative, highly centralized, and surprisingly daring animated program that pushed boundaries in ways most people never realized. From the analog voice manipulation that predicted modern music trends, to the corporate naming conventions, to the dark episode content, the Chipmunks were way more complex than anyone gave them credit for. And the fact that it was all controlled by a husband and wife team who maintained absolute creative authority, that's the kind of Hollywood story that doesn't happen anymore. And hey, if you're enjoying these bizarre facts about the Chipmunks, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm push this video to other people who grew up in the 80s like us. And if you want more deep dives into the weird secrets behind your favorite childhood shows, make sure you subscribe, because I've got a ton more of these coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.